Wealthy heiress mocked the babysitter's scent. The mafia boss gave his answer at dinner. The smell hit her first. Not the garlands or the spiced desserts. Something else. Something colder. Tyrion didn't pause. She adjusted the toddler's scarf, brushing his soft curls behind his ear as she crouched beside him. The marble floor chilled through the thin soles of her flats. Around her, the estate buzzed with clinking glasses, echoing laughter, and the muted hum of a string quartet. But near the center of the ballroom, a voice sliced through it all. I thought I smelled poverty. Silence didn't fall immediately. First came the nervous laugh of a man who didn't get the joke. Then the whisper of glass against crystal as people stopped mid-sip. "Oh," the voice dragged with amusement, "it's the babysitter." Tyrion didn't move. The toddler in the red sweater tugged at her arm, asking for his napkin. She pulled one from her apron and handed it to him, still crouched. From across the ballroom, heads turned slowly. At her. At the little boy. Then toward the long, silver-clad figure standing beside the wine tower. Matilda Dorn. Hair pinned, shoulders squared, earrings shining like tiny knives. "Patchouli?" Matilda asked the heir, turning her nose. "Or is that just goodwill perfume?" She smiled without blinking. Maybe they thought it would blend with the pine. Tyrion stood now. Not too fast, not slow. She dusted off her skirt once, picked up the boy's toy car from the floor, and placed it in her apron pocket. She didn't flinch, didn't fire back, didn't excuse herself. She walked calmly toward the staff corridor, past murmurs, eyes, half-bitten spoons, and swallowed guilt. A waiter gave her a small nod, sympathy she didn't ask for. But someone else had noticed. Seated at the end of the table, under the soft halo of the chandelier, a man tapped his index finger once against the stem of his wine glass. His eyes hadn't moved from her since the insult. He finished the last sip with deliberate ease. Then, without speaking, placed the glass down on its side. Across the room, Matilda blinked as if sensing the temperature change. The sound of her own. Footsteps on polished marble was louder than the music now. Tyrion didn't rush. She kept one hand on the child's back and her chin high as she stepped off the ballroom floor. The staff hallway was dimmer, warmer, lined with coats and hurried whispers. But even behind the double doors, she could still feel the stares. She could still hear the insult echoing. She inhaled quietly. The pine, scented garland over the archway didn't do much to block the smell of caviar and roasted lamb that clung to the back of her apron. In the dining room, conversations restarted slowly, but something had shifted. A thread had been pulled. At the long table, Anton Carlo tapped the edge of his fork once against his plate. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't even blinked during the exchange. But when he leaned forward slightly, the butler closest to him stiffened. Anton spoke with no expression. "Wine," he said. The man nodded and moved. Next to him, a wealthy banker from Queens kept glancing toward Matilda as if to say, "You may have gone too far." But no one told Matilda Dome what to say. She wasn't bred for caution. She was bred for presence. And she'd made hers known. Tyrion helped the toddler remove his sweater in the coat room. The boy yawned, not understanding the storm that had just passed over his head. He simply held on to her fingers, warm and trusting. She knelt, smoothing his shirt. Her voice was soft. "We're okay." He nodded with sleepy confidence. As she stood, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She wasn't expecting a message. She reached for it slowly, brows tightening. But before she could check, the butler entered the room. "Miss Holt." His voice held a strange formality. She turned. "Yes?" "Mr. Carlo would like a moment." She blinked. "Me?" he said. "Now." She hesitated. The child tugged her hand again. "Come back soon?" She nodded. "Always." As she followed the butler down the hallway, the sound of heels and silver clinks faded behind her. The tension didn't. It followed in silence. Outside the ballroom, near the glass terrace, Anton stood facing the snow-covered trees. He didn't turn when she stepped in. "Is your hand steady?" he asked calmly. She wasn't sure if it was a question or a test, but she answered anyway. "Yes." Anton turned then, slow and deliberate, like someone who never rushed a decision. His eyes met hers, not cold, not kind, just calculating. The kind of look that measured a person's choices more than their words. "You didn't speak back," he said. Tarion stood still, unsure what this moment was or who it was for. "Was I supposed to?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked a few steps to the terrace door and pushed it open. A wave of cold air swept in, sharp, clean, uninviting. Snow fell in slow spirals over the patio, blanketing the furniture and pine branches in soft white. Without looking at her, he said, "Come." She followed, hesitating only once to glance down at her flats. No coat, no gloves, just thin shoes and the heat of confusion in her chest. Outside, the wind tugged at her apron strings. The cold bit her skin immediately. Anthony pointed toward the edge of the terrace, where a child's scarf had been left on a chair. "Is that yours?" Tarion walked over and picked it up. "Belongs to the younger one. He drops it everywhere." She folded it slowly, then turned back. Anthony didn't move. "You know who I am?" he asked. She nodded once. "Yes." He waited. "And that doesn't scare you?" Tarion held his stare. No, a flicker, barely a shift, in his expression. Maybe amusement. Maybe approval. Hard to tell. He stepped closer. "Matilda thinks cruelty is a charm," he said. "She thinks her last name gives her permission." Tarion stayed quiet. "She humiliated someone who didn't fight back," he added. "In her world, that means she won." Tarion's jaw tightened. "Some of us can't afford to make scenes. And some of us," he said quietly, "choose when to make them." She didn't respond. The lights inside glowed warmer now against the frost, covered windows behind them. The music had shifted to something softer. Anthony turned slightly, enough for his voice to carry. "Do you believe in public correction?" "One believe in dignity," she replied. He nodded once. "Good." Then he looked at the butler standing at the door. "Clear the dessert." The butler froze. "Sir?" Anthony didn't repeat himself. Inside, plates stopped clinking. Chairs creaked, and a rich silence dropped. Tarion looked at him. "What are you doing?" His reply was so calm it chilled more than the snow. "Giving an answer." The ballroom shifted the moment his instruction reached the staff. A wave moved through the room as waiters stepped forward and lifted untouched dessert plates off linen. Conversation staggered. A few guests glanced at each other, unsure whether to whisper or stay still. Matilda sat straighter, confusion stiffening her shoulders. "Why are they taking the desserts? We haven't finished." No one answered her. At the entrance to the terrace, Tarion stood half in the cold, half in the warm glow from inside. She watched Anthony enter the ballroom with the same controlled pace he used when leaving. No raised voice, no emotion, yet every guest followed him with their eyes. He stopped beside Matilda's chair. She lifted her chin. "Is something wrong?" "You insulted the wrong person," he said. Her mouth parted. "Excuse me?" Anthony nodded toward the staff wing. "Your voice traveled farther than you thought." "Oh, come on," she said with a scoff. "It was a joke." "Jokes have weight when spoken in rooms like this," he replied. "You threw yours without care." She laughed lightly, but her fingers tightened on her napkin. "And what, you're offended on her behalf?" "I'm correcting the environment," he said. Gasps rippled. Anthony looked to the head waiter. "Switch her table placement." Matilda's face drained. "What?" "Move her to the kitchen lounge. Serve her dessert there." A stiff pow. Anthony leaned slightly toward the waiter. "Now." Chairs scraped. The staff stepped forward. A hush swept through the room as Matilda pushed to her feet, disbelief etched across her face. "You're humiliating me," she hissed under her breath. "No," he said. "I'm showing you what you tried to do." She stared at him, breath sharp, voice low and tight. "You think you can treat me like—" He cut her off without raising a finger. "This is your reminder. Power isn't a toy." Her chest rose and fell in angry shivers. The waiter gestured toward the hallway. Tarion watched the scene, hands folded around the child's scarf. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't shocked. She didn't move. But Anthon did. He walked toward her, stopping a short distance away. The room held its breath without being told. "You're not the help," he said quietly, loud enough for only those nearest to hear. "You're the only one here who carried dignity tonight." The warmth in her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. Music resumed faintly. Guests whispered. Then the butler approached her with an envelope. "For you," he said. Tyrion hesitated before taking it. Her pulse jumped once. She didn't open it, because across the room, Anthon Carlo hadn't stopped watching her, and she couldn't tell if his look meant trouble or the beginning of something she couldn't name. Tyrion finally slid her thumb under the envelope flap, only for a sudden buzz from her phone to stop her movement. A notification from an unknown number. 3 words. "You deserve more." The silver fork barely scraped her plate, yet the sound turned heads. Matilda Dorn twirled a bite of poached pear across her dessert dish, chin tilted, wrist poised. She didn't eat it. She just watched it roll. "Such a sensitive room tonight," she murmured, lips barely moving. Across the table, the sommelier pretended to recheck his wine notes. A young couple beside her exchanged glances and returned to their plates. Matilda didn't care. She had always understood her power didn't come from shouting. It came from how fast people looked down when she raised a brow. She tapped her champagne flute once with a manicured finger. "I do miss Milan," she said to no one. "At least there, the help knows their place." Another silence stretched. Another fork paused mid-air. Then she leaned slightly toward her cousin's girlfriend, lowering her voice just enough to still be heard. "This estate used to be about taste. Now it's community theater." A tight laugh slipped from someone near the end of the table, quickly muffled with a cough. Matilda smiled. It wasn't about humor. It was about control. She scanned the room like someone inspecting property. Waitstaff carried themselves stiffer now. The music felt thinner. Even the child, now gone to the staff wing, had been pulled like a wrinkle from the fabric of her party. And that babysitter, Matilda's eyes narrowed. She remembered how the woman hadn't blinked, hadn't begged, hadn't looked hurt. She simply walked away like she didn't need to defend herself. That's what unsettled her most. She hated when people didn't flinch. It ruined the sport. So she sat straighter in her chair, adjusted her napkin with one graceful flick, and let her voice carry again. "Of course, in Europe we don't confuse humility with invisibility." The head waiter cleared his throat behind her. "Ma'am," he said softly, "would you like another drink?" Matilda smiled like a queen granting favor. Something crisp, sharp on the finish. He nodded and turned away quickly. As her glass refilled, she leaned back, satisfied. The house was hers tonight. At least it had been, until that man. That cousin from the other side of the family. She glanced down the table. Anthon Carlo hadn't said another word since his quiet command, but he hadn't looked away either. He raised his eyes just once, toward the staff wing. Then, with the calm of someone choosing when to cut stone, he looked directly at her. Matilda held his gaze, but her smile faltered. Anthon didn't blink. He didn't tilt his head or twitch his jaw. He just looked. And somehow that unsettled her more than if he'd stood and said her name out loud. She turned back to her plate, face cool again, composed, but her fingers touched the base of her glass with more pressure than before. He wouldn't say anything. He wouldn't dare. This was her uncle's home. She was the Dorn who still bore the name, not him. Anthon might be powerful, but she was legacy. She knew which names the estate contracts were under. She knew the weight of old money. Still, her heart thudded once in her chest. She ignored it. A waiter passed behind her, carrying folded napkins. She didn't glance at him. She never did. Half the faces working tonight blurred into one. Maids, butlers, drivers, kitchen hands. They served the backdrop. They weren't the story. And yet tonight, one of them had stolen the room. She hated that. Hated how people had paused, how their reactions weren't all amused. Some had looked uncomfortable, others disapproved. She'd seen it, especially when Anthon moved. His silence had spread through the table like smoke. No outburst, no lecture. Just that single command, clear the dessert. And they had listened. Matilda picked up her spoon and let it clink sharply against the edge of her glass plate. The sound echoed. She caught her reflection in the water glass. Perfect makeup, hair swept back tight, skin glowing under chandelier light. She didn't make mistakes. She never had. She said what others were too afraid to. Yet somehow the mood had shifted away from her. Tarian Holt. That was the girl's name, wasn't it? Quiet. Too quiet. Always in the background, but never uncertain. She didn't smile too much, didn't act out of place, yet never looked intimidated. Matilda hated that more than anything. "Ma'am," a voice said gently from behind her. She turned. The same butler as before, holding a silver dish with a small folded note on top. "This was given to me by Mr. Carlo." Her stomach turned, but she smiled as she accepted it. She unfolded the note. 2 words were written in clean, sharp handwriting. "Watch yourself." Matilda's fingers tightened around the note as if the paper might split. She lifted her gaze, trying to read the room. But the guests were too busy pretending not to watch her. They chewed slower, sipped quieter. Every move carried a quiet edge now. She forced a breath and placed the note under her plate, sliding it out of sight. No one gave her warnings. No one, not even her father, spoke to her like that. She scanned the table again. Anthony didn't look at her this time. He was speaking softly to the sommelier, pointing to a bottle on the far right of the wine display. He seemed uninterested, almost bored. That irritated her even more. A man beside her leaned slightly and whispered, "Everything. All right?" She straightened her posture. "Perfect. Why wouldn't it be?" He nodded and turned away, unconvinced. A server reached over to refill Matilda's glass. She snapped her fingers once. "Not that one." "The other." "Yes, ma'am." The server adjusted quickly. She liked that. Small signs she still had control, still had presence, still had a voice that made people move. But when she looked down at her plate again, something bothered her. The note. Even folded, she felt its weight. "Watch yourself." She swallowed hard, pushing her shoulders back. She refused to let a single sentence from a Carlo shake her. She knew the stories about that side of the family, how they built their money, how they dealt with disrespect. But this was a holiday dinner, not some smoky backroom negotiation, and she hadn't done anything wrong. She didn't insult the child. She insulted the babysitter, a stranger, a nobody. Her jaw tightened. "Ma'am, would you like the next course served?" The head waiter asked. "Yes," she said, then quickly added, "And tell the staff to move with more care. I won't tolerate mistakes tonight." "Yes, ma'am." As he walked away, she tapped her nails against the table in an even rhythm. Control. She needed to regain control. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to the woman across from her. "These gatherings fall apart when you let emotion in. People forget their roles." The woman gave a hollow smile, nervous, uncertain, not siding with her. Matilda hated that too. She reached for her glass, but before she could lift it, the double doors to the staff wing shifted open. Tarian stepped out, composed, and Anthony Carlo's head turned, slow and precise, toward the doorway, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. His eyes flicked once toward the staff wing, then locked directly onto Matilda. Matilda's fingers tightened around the note, as if the paper might split. She lifted her gaze, trying to read the room, but the guests were too busy pretending not to watch her. They chewed slower, sipped quieter. Every move carried a quiet edge now. She forced a breath and placed the note under her plate, sliding it out of sight. No one gave her warnings. No one. Not even her father spoke to her like that. She scanned the table again. Anthony didn't look at her this time. He was speaking softly to the sommelier, pointing to a bottle on the far right of the wine display. He seemed uninterested, almost bored. That irritated her even more. A man beside her leaned slightly and whispered, "Everything all right?" She straightened her posture. "Perfect. Why wouldn't it be?" He nodded and turned away, unconvinced. A server reached over to refill Matilda's glass. She snapped her fingers once. "Not that one." The other. "Yes, ma'am." The server adjusted quickly. She liked that. Small signs she still had control, still had presence, still had a voice that made people move. But when she looked down at her plate again, something bothered her. The note. Even folded, she felt its weight. Watch yourself. She swallowed hard, pushing her shoulders back. She refused to let a single sentence from a Carlo shake her. She knew the stories about that side of the family, how they built their money, how they dealt with disrespect. But this was a holiday dinner, not some smoky backroom negotiation, and she hadn't done anything wrong. She didn't insult the child. She insulted the babysitter, a stranger, a nobody. Her jaw tightened. "Ma'am, would you like the next course served?" The head waiter asked. "Yes," she said, then quickly added, "And tell the staff to move with more care. I won't tolerate mistakes tonight." "Yes, ma'am." As he walked away, she tapped her nails against the table in an even rhythm. Control. She needed to regain control. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to the woman across from her. "These gatherings fall apart when you let emotion in. People forget their roles." The woman gave a hollow smile, nervous, uncertain, not siding with her. Matilda hated that too. She reached for her glass, but before she could lift it, the double doors to the staff wing shifted open. A quiet hush spread. Carlo's head turned, slow and precise, toward the doorway, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment. His eyes flicked once toward the staff wing, then locked directly onto Matilda. Matilda felt it before she understood it. His eyes on her, not like a threat, but like a warning that had already passed. Anton didn't speak. He didn't gesture. He didn't need to. She froze halfway through a breath. Tarian crossed the room quietly, holding a folded blanket in her arms. She wasn't serving anything, wasn't interrupting. She was simply retrieving something the child had left behind. And yet, the room shifted again. Guests followed her movement with subtle glances. Eyes cut across wine glasses and linen folds. A few leaned away from Matilda's end of the table. Tarian stopped near the back of the room, speaking to a staff member in a soft voice. A child's toy was passed into her hands. She nodded once and turned to leave. No noise, no rush, just a presence that didn't ask for permission. And still, Anton watched. Matilda felt heat crawl up her neck. Her jaw moved slightly, tightening, loosening, unsure what to do. Her face stayed composed, but her pulse betrayed her. She looked down at her plate. The note was still there. She slid it into her clutch and stood, adjusting her gown as if she needed air. "Going somewhere?" a guest asked with a light chuckle. "Powder room," she replied smoothly, but her tone clipped. She stepped out into the hallway and exhaled through her nose. The walls felt too close, the lights too dim. She reached for her phone. No new messages. She opened a group chat. 4 of her closest girls from college. She typed, "Cousin trying to embarrass me at this dinner, trying to defend the help. Total joke." She paused. No one responded. She deleted the message. She wasn't looking for backup. She didn't need it. Matilda slid her phone back into her clutch and looked up. Anton Carlo stood at the far end of the hallway, arms crossed. Still, he didn't say a word, didn't even move closer, but his presence said enough. She turned without a word and walked back into the ballroom. She would not let tonight be the night her name bent under someone else's. Rules. She would not let a babysitter steal her place. But as she returned to her seat, one thought wouldn't leave her. Tarian didn't fight her, and still, she had lost the room. Anton Carlo didn't need anyone to like him. He didn't chase smiles, didn't clap backs or dress for applause. When he walked into a room, he didn't bring noise. He brought memory. People remembered what they said around him, and what they didn't. Tonight, he had said only a few words, but already the room had tilted. At the far end of the table, he refolded his napkin with care, his fingers methodical. A waiter approached, hesitated, then backed away without a word. That was the Carlo rule. Don't interrupt the silence unless invited. To most guests, Anton was a name whispered behind estate doors. A cousin from the edge of the Dorn family tree, but with roots deep in something older, sharper. Heir to the Carlo freight empire, an enterprise that operated both above the docks and beneath the surface. Imports, exports, influence. Old money feared him, new money envied him. The middle class never heard of him, and that's how he liked it. He'd watched Matilda for 2 days now. Since she arrived, she'd walked through the halls as if they belonged to her alone. Clacking heels, glassy eyes, compliments with blades tucked inside. She had the adorned polish, but not the discipline. She mistook cruelty for control, the mistake most heirs make. Anthon lifted his glass, slow and steady. He didn't drink yet. Just watched the way his cousin's daughter tapped her fork too hard against the china. How she leaned forward like she was still center stage. He already knew what she would say next. What she didn't know was that her place at this table had already been revoked. Not publicly, not yet. But it was coming. He took a sip. The wine was smooth, dry, decisive. Across from him, a woman in her 50s leaned over to whisper something to her husband. Both glanced at him once, then back to their plates. He caught every glance. He always did. He didn't mind being watched. Watching back was the part no one expected. A waiter stepped too quickly at his side. Silverware clinked. Anthon didn't flinch, but he did lower his hand and rest 3 fingers gently on the table. The waiter froze mid-step. Anthon glanced toward the hallway where Tyrion had exited moments ago. Then, without raising his voice, he looked at the head waiter. Clear the table. The head waiter blinked once. "Sir?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Anthon didn't repeat himself. The pause stretched like wire. Then the head waiter gave a nod. Servers moved instantly. Plates lifted. Forks scraped softly against porcelain. Conversations broke off mid-thought. People straightened in their seats, unsure if something sacred had been broken. No one said a word. At the center of it all, Anthon remained still. His command hadn't been loud. It hadn't been angry. But it carried weight because it didn't ask permission. Matilda sat 2 seats down, her eyes flicking from hand to hand as plates vanished around her. Her fork hovered above her dessert. "This is unnecessary," she muttered, reaching to stop a server who carefully removed her untouched poached pear. He didn't stop. She turned toward her cousin. "Anthon, what is this?" He didn't look at her. Instead, he folded his napkin and set it beside his plate. Matilda's voice sharpened. "Are you punishing the entire room because of a comment?" Still no answer. He wasn't punishing the room. He was correcting it. Anthon stood slowly, not to make a scene, but to remind the room that one had already happened. And it hadn't come from him. The staff stood taller as he passed. He didn't speak to them either. They knew. They all knew. He walked past Matilda without sparing her a glance. Past guests who looked away. Past family who had once called him the quiet one in back hallways. His silence didn't mean small. It meant stored. At the hallway entrance, he stopped beside the butler who'd delivered the note. "Make room," he said calmly. "We're not done tonight." "Yes, Mr. Carlo." And that was the difference between Anthon and the rest of them. He didn't humiliate people to rise. He made space. But when someone tried to dirty that space with ego and noise, he removed the noise. He turned his head once back toward the table. Not one person met his eyes, except for Matilda, and even she blinked first. Years ago, at another estate dinner, a guest had asked Anthon what his role in the Carlo family business was. He hadn't given an answer. Instead, he'd pushed back his chair, walked into the kitchen, and returned 5 minutes later with a list. Names, flights, ports, a ledger from memory. He placed it on the table and said, "I don't have a role. I hold the line." No one asked again. Anthon Carlo wasn't about position. He was about principle. In rooms full of wealth and pretense, he watched for what people said when they thought no one important was listening. That was what happened tonight. Matilda had spoken like the staff didn't exist, like Tyrion's silence was consent, like cruelty dressed in charm was still fashionable. But Anthon had never confused silence with surrender. He'd seen what it cost to stay quiet. He'd seen who broke when no one defended them. It was his sister who taught him that. He still remembered her sitting on the balcony at their Chicago townhouse, hands clenched, makeup running, humiliated at a family dinner when someone's wife called her cheap perfume and borrowed shoes. No one corrected the woman. Not even their father. His sister stopped attending public events after that, and eventually stopped answering his calls. Anthon never forgot the silence that followed. He told himself, next time, he'd speak. So when Tarian didn't defend herself, he didn't see weakness. He saw endurance. The same kind his sister once had before she disappeared behind shame no one had earned. Now he wouldn't let another woman carry that wound in silence. He made his way to the wine bar, scanned the bottles with a glance, and nodded toward one with no label, black-glassed and reserved. The sommelier hesitated, then opened it without a word. Anthon took the glass and returned to the far end of the room. He didn't sit. He stood at the table's edge, watching every movement. Matilda didn't speak now. She stirred her water absently, as if pretending nothing had shifted. But the room had shifted. The mood, the air, the weight of the night. He took a slow sip, not because he needed the taste, but because power, real power, doesn't rush to prove itself. It lets the world catch up. And tonight the room was finally catching up to him. The music changed to something slower. Strings floated faintly above whispered conversations, the kind of melody chosen to ease tension. But tonight, it only made the silence sharper. Anthon set his glass down and glanced once more toward the hallway Tarian had disappeared into. He didn't move toward her. Didn't need to. Timing wasn't just about when to act. It was about when not to. Across the room, a waiter cleared the final plate. The entire table had surrendered its course without protest. Anthon looked to the head waiter again. "Bring the next bottle," he said, then after a short pause, added 3 more words that cut like a signature. "From my cellar." The waiter nodded once and left. That phrase, "from my cellar," wasn't just about wine. It was a signal to everyone who understood what it meant to borrow power and what it meant to own it. Anthon wasn't borrowing anyone's name. He wasn't protected by inheritance. His respect didn't come from the Dorn line. It came from the one he'd built. Brick by brick, deal by deal, loyalty by loyalty. No scandal, no outbursts, no slaps at dinners or scandals in tabloids. Just one look, one nod, one decision. That's all it ever took. Matilda sat in her chair like a woman who still had the dress, the diamonds, the name, but had somehow lost the room. Because she had, and she knew it. Her phone lit up under the table. She glanced down, eager for escape. A message from her father. She opened it quickly. "Stay quiet." Anthon isn't bluffing. Her stomach dropped. She looked around. No one was looking at her now. The laughter that returned to the room didn't involve her. The guests who once complimented her gown had turned to other conversations. She wasn't center anymore. She was furniture. Anthon returned to his seat, folded his cuffs, and leaned slightly to speak to the guest beside him. A quiet laugh followed, the first genuine one all night. That was his strength, not the correction, the calm after it. Because in his world, correction wasn't for revenge. It was a reminder. Across the room, the staff doors eased open. Tarian stepped through again, this time holding a tray with folded blankets for the children in the family wing. She didn't glance at Matilda. She didn't speak, and Anthon didn't watch her leave, but his hand tapped the side of his glaçons. He'd already made his move. The rest was just watching the lesson land. The glass doors swung open. Cold air rushed in like truth, sharp, unwanted, and unstoppable. Anthon stood with his back to the ballroom, hands in the pockets of his tailored coat. Snowflakes clung to his shoulders, melting slow against the dark wool. Fairy lights blinked across the winter patio, tangled in garlands and wrapped around pine trees. "Step outside," he said. Matilda hesitated at the threshold. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even looked directly at her, but everyone heard it. She looked around. No one met her eyes. Her heels clicked as she stepped onto the stone terrace. The doors closed behind her with a hush that felt final. Anthon didn't move. "I came out of respect," she said first, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "This is my uncle's house. That's why I haven't asked you to leave it." She blinked. "This is about the babysitter?" Her voice climbed a note. "No," he said simply. It's about you. He finally turned. You've confused shame with humor. Again. I said one thing. You said it loudly, knowing she couldn't answer. He took a step forward, slow and certain. You wanted a room to laugh. Matilda scoffed. You've got this whole hero act down now? Anthon's stare didn't waver. No act. Just memory. He pointed behind her through the glass, to the child curled up on a staff member's shoulder, already half asleep. You insulted her caregiver. She's the help. Don't finish that sentence, he said, flat and final. The words died in her throat. A waiter stepped out. Sir? Is her plate cleared? Anthon asked. Yes, sir. Good. Pack her dessert. Matilda blinked. You're joking. The waiter didn't move. Anthon gave him one nod. Wrap it in plastic. Matilda stared at him, breath catching. You're serious. Deadly. The waiter stepped back inside. She stepped closer to him now, lips tight, voice lowered. You're humiliating me. No, you're doing that on your own, he said. She looked down, then back up. You think this makes you powerful? He leaned in slightly. No. This makes me clear. The patio door opened again. The butler handed her a small dessert plate, sealed in plastic, on a tray. Anthon nodded toward the corner seating near the heaters. She can finish it in the lounge. The door closed again. Inside, the silence spread like ink on silk. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. The clatter of dessert forks had stopped completely. Only the faint sound of heaters from the patio filled the room. One waiter cleared a glass with both hands, like he was afraid to breathe wrong. Matilda stood motionless by the door, the sealed dessert plate in her hands. Her silver gown, once the loudest thing in the room, now felt like noise out of place. The house manager approached her cautiously. You can sit in the staff lounge. She blinked. You're serious? Mr. Carlos said it wasn't a request. She stared past him into the ballroom. Not one of her cousins looked up. Not one aunt or family friend offered a hand or a word. Not even her uncle. She'd always known these circles turned cold quickly, but this was ice. Her heels tapped slowly as she followed the manager down the side hallway. Head high, each step an attempt to preserve whatever pride was left. Meanwhile, Tyrion returned through the opposite end, holding a soft blanket and one of the children's teddy bears. She didn't look toward the table. She moved the way she always did, quiet, focused. But this time, the air around her had changed. Staff stood a little straighter when she passed. A few nodded. One even smiled, not out of pity, out of recognition. She wasn't just the help anymore. She had been defended, publicly, calmly, unmistakably. Tyrion walked past the double doors leading to the patio. The snow glowed faintly under the golden lights. A gust of wind blew a pine ribbon loose, curling toward the edge of the terrace. She stopped, adjusted the scarf on the child she'd come for, and looked out. Anthon still stood there, but he didn't look at her. He was watching the door Matilda had just exited through. The tension hadn't left his posture. He didn't lean, didn't ease. Tyrion lingered for half a second longer, then turned toward the family wing. As she walked away, the waiter who had delivered Matilda's plate walked past in the other direction. He said nothing, but as their eyes met for a brief second, she noticed something strange. He didn't look at her like staff anymore. He looked at her like someone who'd just seen a name change in real time. The staff lounge wasn't meant for guests. It smelled like brewed coffee, lemon polish, and heat from the old radiator that clicked every 10 minutes. A folding table sat in the center with a tin of shortbread cookies, half-eaten. A muted TV in the corner played reruns of a holiday movie no one was watching. Matilda stood in the middle, still holding the wrapped dessert, like it might melt her dignity if she set it down. She didn't sit. 2 kitchen workers glanced at her, and then back to their tasks. A young assistant chef passed through, eyes darting to the tray, then quickly away. Is there somewhere else I can wait? She asked. Aloud, no one answered. Matilda moved to the only empty chair in the corner and lowered herself slowly. Her gown gathered awkwardly beneath her. not meant for plastic chairs or chipped linoleum. She placed the dessert plate on the table in front of her. Wrapped in clear film, the candied pear and sugared almonds looked dull now, like they belonged to someone else's evening. She didn't touch it. Minutes passed. Then the butler entered. He walked in without ceremony and stood beside her table, hands folded behind his back. "Mr. Carlo says you are welcome to finish your meal here." Her jaw clenched. "I'm sure he does. And," the butler added, voice calm, "he asks that you reflect on the difference between having a name and holding respect." She looked up at him, expression blank. "Are you enjoying this?" "I'm not involved," he said simply, "just delivering the message." She laughed once, bitter and small. "He doesn't forget anything, does he?" "No," the butler said, "not when it matters." He turned and walked out. The heater clicked again. Matilda looked down at the dessert. Steam had built up slightly beneath the plastic. The sugar glaze had turned cloudy. She reached for the fork that had been tucked beside it, but halfway there her hand paused. She let it fall back into her lap. She didn't eat. Meanwhile, on the other side of the house, in the wide marble hall beyond the dining room, Anthon stood beside the wine wall, checking the time on his watch. A guest tried to make conversation near him but gave up quickly when he didn't respond. He wasn't ignoring them. He was waiting. Tarian didn't know why her steps slowed near the patio again. She had already done her rounds, checked the children, folded the napkins, passed instructions to the evening shift, but something in her chest hadn't settled. Through the tall glass doors, she could see the outside lights glowing over the snow. Empty chairs circled the fire pit. The flame had died down, but the warmth still hovered like breath from a waiting mouth. And Anthon was still there, still standing. He was watching the wing Matilda had disappeared into. She approached the door quietly, not pushing it open, just close enough to hear if he said anything. He didn't, but as if sensing her presence, he shifted his weight and turned his head slightly toward the glass. Not all the way. Not enough to see her fully. Just enough to acknowledge. She stayed. Inside the ballroom, laughter had started again, but it was lighter now. The kind that came not from joy but relief. The kind that said, someone did what no one else wanted to do. Anthon had made no speech, no toast, no dramatic stand. He didn't need it. The staff moved smoother now. One of the older servers whispered something to Tarian in passing. "Thank you," he said. She didn't know what to say to that. She hadn't done anything but survive the moment. But Anthon? He had done exactly what he said he would. Corrected the room. From the corner of her eye, she saw the butler return to the patio with a message. He handed Anthon a folded card. Anthon didn't open it right away. He looked at it for a long second, then passed it back without a word. "Return it," he said. "I gave her what I meant to give." The butler nodded and left. Anthon turned then, toward the doors, toward Tarian. She stepped back slightly, unsure if she should be standing there. But he didn't seem surprised. He looked at her, not through her. "You're not the help," he said, voice low, calm. "You're the only one here who carried dignity tonight." She didn't speak, didn't know how. He didn't wait for her to. He turned and walked past the ballroom, the guests, the crystal lights. The night was far from over, but the message had landed. Tarian found the envelope on her folded towel. It wasn't tucked or hidden. It was placed deliberately, right on top of the navy cotton she always used to dry the children's mittens. Cream-colored, thick paper. Her full name printed across the center in clean block letters. No script, no flair, just her name. She picked it up slowly. It didn't feel like a thank you card. The hallway behind the kitchen buzzed with soft conversation, but her hand stood still. A draft from the back entrance brushed across her arm, but she didn't feel it. Her fingers slid under the flap. Inside, one sheet. No holiday greeting, no formal letterhead, just a printed title. Carlo Family Holdings Position, Director of Child Enrichment and Development. In residence below it, details. Base salary, benefits, a relocation stipend, full medical coverage for her and her mother, private housing, then something that made her breath hitch. Full tuition sponsorship for one dependent. Institution, New York University. Her hand trembled slightly. At the bottom, one line. People who protect others quietly are worth more than people who perform loudly. Come work for people who see that. CN. She folded the letter quickly and looked around, as if someone might accuse her of stealing it. No one had followed her. She stepped into the back corner of the hallway, letting her back rest against the pantry door. She opened the paper again. It hadn't changed. Her eyes caught the figure again. $215,000 per year, more than she'd ever seen in her life, more than her mother made in 10 years, more than what some of the guests tonight probably assumed someone like her could earn at all. Tarian's throat tightened. This wasn't a Christmas bonus. It wasn't charity. It was an offer, a real one. And the part that scared her wasn't the number. It was the fact that someone like Anton Carlo had noticed. Not the way she looked, not how she dressed, but how she moved, how she carried the kids, how she stayed quiet, even when it burned. Tarian folded the letter again, slower this time, pressing the crease with her thumb. She knew how to read contracts. Her mother used to make her read the fine print on every lease, every medical form. But this wasn't about fine print. This was about belief. She had worked since she was 17. No handouts, no miracles, no sudden chances. Just shift after shift, call after call, saving every cent for her mother's medication, every extra hour for her sister's tuition dreams. She had never dared to imagine stepping into a role with more than a weekly pay stub. And now, here it was. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to her sister's contact, pressed it, then hovered over the call button. No, not yet. She wasn't ready to explain this to anyone. Not until she understood why Anthon had written this, why he had noticed her in a room full of velvet and diamonds. Why now? A staff member walked past, offering a polite nod. She nodded back, tucking the envelope close to her chest like it was fragile. She stepped outside, just for air. The back courtyard was empty, snow covering the patio chairs. Light spilled out from the kitchen windows, warm and soft. The night had gone quiet again. Tarian closed her eyes and let the cold brush her skin. What if it was real? What if it wasn't a test, or a trick, or some dramatic gesture meant to make a point? What if it was exactly what it looked like? She opened her eyes and looked up toward the stars. The sky was clear now. No wind, just breath. Something in her shifted. She wasn't being given a favor. She was being given a choice, and she had earned it. Tarian re-entered the hallway with the envelope still pressed against her ribs. The laughter from the ballroom had returned, low and distant. It no longer reached her. It didn't need to. She passed by the service sink and caught her reflection in the narrow mirror propped above the shelf. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, eyes a little tired, but steady. She didn't look like someone who'd just been offered a $250,000 future, but she didn't look scared either. She moved toward the staff coat area and placed the envelope inside, the pocket of her jacket, deep, where it couldn't fall or be mistaken. Then she sat down for the first time that night. No rush, no task. No one calling her name, and that's when the second realization settled in. Someone had been watching her this whole time, not in a way that made her feel small, but in a way that said, "I see how hard you try when no one else is clapping." She leaned forward and rested her arms on her knees, hands clasped. A job like that, it would change everything. Her mother's appointments wouldn't have to be delayed until insurance cleared. Her sister wouldn't need to keep emailing professors to ask for payment extensions. They could breathe. For the first time in years they could breathe, but still, why her? Why would a man like Anthon Carlo, with access to anyone he wanted, offer this to her? A babysitter with 2 worn shoes and no college degree? That was the part she couldn't wrap her head around. Until she remembered something. That night in the foyer, when the child spilled juice across the velvet bench. She had shielded the stain with her arm before the head of the house saw it. She hadn't said a word. She had just protected what wasn't hers to lose. Maybe he saw that. Maybe that was the moment. She stood again, slower this time. The envelope still waited in her coat. She didn't need to reread it. She believed it now. She stepped into the hallway toward the kitchen, her breath even, and stopped. At the far end of the corridor, through the glass pane in the service door, Anton Carlo was standing still, facing her. Tarion didn't move at first. Anton hadn't knocked. He hadn't spoken. He just stood there on the other side of the glass, still, unreadable, waiting without demand. The hallway buzzed faintly behind her. A kitchen door swung open and closed. Distant laughter echoed from the main floor, but where she stood, everything was quiet. He didn't try to come in. He didn't wave her over. He left the decision with her. She reached for the door handle. It wasn't shaking hands or racing heartbeats this time. It was steady. She opened it slowly. The cold met her again. Not as harsh, not as biting, but crisp enough to remind her this moment was real. Anton turned toward her with the same calm weight he always carried. His coat was still buttoned, his gloves tucked into one palm. He didn't speak. Neither did she. They stood across from each other, no more than a few steps apart. The space between them held more than words: dignity, risk, and something that felt like recognition. She didn't thank him. Not yet. Instead, she held his gaze and said the only thing that mattered. "Is it real?" His eyes didn't flinch. He gave one single nod, nothing more. That was his answer, and it was enough. Tarion didn't smile. She didn't cry. But something in her shoulders loosened. She turned to go back inside, but just before stepping through the door, she paused. She looked back once more. He was still watching her. Not possessively, not like a man claiming credit, like a man making sure the offer landed in the right hands. Their eyes met again. No words passed, but her silence wasn't the same as before. This time it held weight. This time it spoke. She stepped inside and let the door close gently behind her. And as she walked back toward the coat rack, toward the envelope with her future folded inside it, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message from a client or a reminder for the children. It was an automated email. Subject line: NYU tuition payment confirmed. She stared at it, then slowly turned around. Anton Carlo was gone, but his answer had already been given. The hallway smelled the same, a trace of lemon polish, the faint scent of aging wood under luxury wax, and a silence thick enough to carry memory. Anton walked slowly, hands behind his back, eyes locked on the ground 2 feet ahead. He didn't need to look up. He'd memorized this hallway long ago. This was where his sister had stood, years before. Same hallway, same estate, different winter. Back then, it had been a New Year's party. Their family had flown in heavy from Chicago, dripping in old power and forced tradition. Everyone had smiled. Everyone had clinked glasses. Until the woman in the emerald dress asked the question, "Is she adopted?" The guest had laughed, too loud. "She doesn't quite match." The room paused just long enough for the wound to land. No one corrected her. Not their father, not the aunts, not even Anton. His sister hadn't said a word. She had stood in this hallway right at the edge of the stairwell, holding her small purse like a shield. She never came back to the estate after that. The following year she dropped out of Columbia, moved away, disconnected her number. Anton had carried the silence ever since. And tonight, walking that same hallway, the sound of his own steps stung more than the words ever had. He paused near the old mirror, the one they used to take photos in front of. He stared at his reflection, not to admire it, but to check if he'd changed enough to forgive himself. He hadn't, but he could protect someone else. This offer to Tarion, it wasn't guilt. It wasn't charity. It was a line drawn, a message. Silence isn't weakness when it chooses its moment. He turned from the mirror and kept walking. As he passed the second arch, the sound of soft shoes on tile met his ears. He looked up. Tarion was walking toward him. She held a child in her arms, fast asleep against her chest, wrapped in a blanket with one sock barely clinging to his foot. Her free hand steadied a stuffed elephant. She didn't see Anton yet. But he saw her, and for a moment it was like seeing what his sister never got. Someone still standing, Tarian's steps were careful. She adjusted the toddler slightly, shifting his weight so he wouldn't wake. The soft rise and fall of his chest pressed into hers like a quiet reminder. Someone trusted her without needing to ask. She didn't notice Anton until she reached the end of the hall. She stopped. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The moment held, not awkward, not uncertain, just still. Anton looked down at the child, then back at her. "You do this often?" he asked. Tarian's voice was low. "Since I was 16. He gave a short nod. She adjusted the blanket again, fingers smoothing over the boy's back. "He has a cough. His mother didn't want him near the guests too long. She trusts you. She has to." "No," Anton replied. "She doesn't." "But she does." Tarian looked at him then, not with doubt, not with curiosity, just recognition. The hallway wasn't warm, but something between them felt grounded now. Like an understanding had formed, not from conversation, but from what hadn't been said. Anton stepped aside without a word, letting her pass. As she moved by, the child shifted slightly in her arms, but didn't wake. And Anton caught it, that instinct, the way she adjusted without thinking, protected without dramatics, rebalanced without complaint. He had seen that once before. But in their mother, back before money hardened everything. Before their name became something people whispered behind closed doors. There had been a day, he must have been 8, when his father had thrown a crystal decanter across their dining room wall after a deal fell apart. Glass exploded, voices rose, and while the house staff froze, while his brother ran upstairs and slammed the door, his mother had walked calmly to the mess, stepped around the shards barefoot, and cleaned it up. No tears, no lecture, just silence and action. That moment stayed with him longer than the yelling did. Because strength, he realized, wasn't about who shouted the loudest. It was who stayed steady when the floor cracked. Tarian turned the corner toward the staff wing. Anton didn't follow, but he watched, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was remembering someone who left. He felt like he was witnessing someone who stayed. Anton moved toward the west wing, a quieter part of the estate where most guests didn't wander. The noise from the ballroom had faded into low hums, muted by thick walls and older brick. This was where his sister used to hide when the parties got too loud. He hadn't walked this wing in years, not since she left. The walls still carried the same art, portraits of family members whose names no one used anymore. Heavy frames, dark eyes, silent judgment. He passed the old piano room. The lid was still closed. No one played it anymore. He remembered the last time his sister did. She'd been 16. After a dinner like this one, where she'd been ignored all night, then asked if she was one of the caterer's children. The joke hadn't landed, but no one corrected it, not even their father. She'd played that piano for an hour afterward, each note sharp, controlled, aching. He never heard her play again. At the end of the hall was a small room, just a bench and a window. It overlooked the service driveway where deliveries came in. He stood in that room now, hands in his pockets. He hadn't meant for tonight to become a memory trigger, but Matilda's voice, sharp and smug, had brought everything back. And Tarian's silence, that had done the rest. She hadn't needed rescuing, but she deserved one anyway. She didn't lower herself. She didn't turn the moment into spectacle. She let the room tell on itself. That was strength. The kind you couldn't teach, the kind that didn't need applause. He didn't want her to just have a better job. He wanted her to have a safer life. Because some people, the ones who keep others steady, never get to be steady themselves. He looked out the window, snow gently collecting on the delivery vans below. Then he turned, walked back down the hallway. As he approached the staircase, a sound stopped him. Not voices, footsteps. Soft. Barely there. Tarian appeared at the top of the landing, blanket still wrapped around the now sleeping child. She held him close, head tilted slightly to check his breathing. She hadn't seen him yet, but Anton saw her, framed against the hallway where his sister once broke. And for the first time in a long time, the hallway didn't feel haunted. It felt redeemed. Tarian shifted the child's weight as she reached the bottom of the stairs, careful not to bump his head against her shoulder. The boy's small hand clung to the collar of her sweater, even in sleep. She didn't notice Anton standing near the side hall until she turned. Their eyes met. She stopped. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The child stirred slightly in her arms, and she rocked once Ben-Ri from her heels, a gentle sway that brought him back into rest. Anton looked at the scene in front of him. Warmth wrapped in discipline, care stitched into action. He stepped forward, not too close, just enough for his voice to carry. "You've done more tonight than most people in that ballroom have done all year." Tarian didn't answer right away, but she didn't look away. "I just did what I was paid for." "No," he said. "You did what they couldn't buy." She blinked. That landed. He nodded toward the staff wing. "You can put him down. Someone will cover the rest." "I'll wait until he's fully asleep," she said softly. "He wakes up if the room's too cold." Anton paused. Then, with no smile but full respect in his tone, he replied, "That's what I mean." He stepped back to give her space. Tarian disappeared into the nursery room, and Anton stood at the hallway entrance, waiting. He looked down at the floor beneath his feet. Years ago, this tile had seen tears, shame, regret. Tonight, it saw purpose. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. When Tarian returned a few minutes later, her hands were empty. Her posture was the same, straight, steady. He turned his head toward her. "You'll think about the offer?" he asked. "I already am." "Good." She walked past him slowly, her coat still on a hook, her bag untouched. But she paused before reaching it. "Your sister," she said without looking back. "Was she like me?" Anton's voice didn't hesitate. "No. You're like who she needed." Tarian didn't speak, didn't nod. But her breath caught, just for a second. She reached for her coat. Anton turned and walked the opposite direction, back through the hallway where memories used to feel heavy. Now they didn't. Because as he passed the comber, he heard the nursery door open quietly behind him. And for the first time in years, it wasn't his sister he thought of. It was the woman still standing. Matilda's heels struck the marble faster than usual. Each step echoed with more panic than poise as she stormed into the private corridor near the guest suites. Her clutch swung against her side, barely zipped. Her phone was already in hand, thumb tapping furiously as she reached her father's number. The call clicked after 2 rings. "Dad," she snapped before he could speak. "Do you know what Anton just did?" A pause. Static. Then I heard. Matilda stopped walking. "He humiliated me," she said, "in front of our guests. Sent me to the kitchen like some seasonal intern." Another pause. "I said I heard." She blinked. "That's all you have to say? You embarrassed the family, Matilda. You took a petty shot at someone, and now you're surprised he didn't let it slide." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She turned around in place, gripping the phone tighter. "She's a babysitter. She's someone he decided to protect." Her chest burned. "You're siding with him?" "No," her father said. "I'm siding with discretion, which you clearly forgot." She started pacing now, one hand to her temple. "He made me eat in the lounge. You shouldn't have spoken the way you did. I said what everyone else was thinking." "Wrong," he snapped. "You said what no one else had the nerve or the cruelty to say out loud." She stopped, stared at her reflection in the tall window. Her makeup still held. Her hair was still perfect. But something in her face looked less sharp now, less sure. Her father's voice softened, but only slightly. "You think this family gets to stay powerful because we talk like that in public? You think we win by humiliating the staff? Anton's not even a real Dorn. He's twice the name you are. Tonight." The line went silent for a moment. Then her father added, "Don't call me again until you've learned to speak with your mouth." The call dropped. Matilda stood frozen. Outside the window, snow kept falling. Soft, soundless, merciless. She turned slowly, pressing her back to the wall, phone still warm in her hand. Her world hadn't just shifted. It had cracked. Matilda lowered the phone from her ear like it might bite. Shut. The hallway felt narrower now, the walls pressing in with silence that wouldn't let go. She walked, slower this time, past the portraits of her grandparents and great-uncles, painted symbols of status she used to take comfort in. Tonight, they looked back at her like strangers. She passed one of the house staff coming around the comer. The woman paused, nodded respectfully. Matilda didn't respond, not because she didn't want to, because she didn't know how to anymore. She reached the end of the corridor, then ducked into one of the smaller guest rooms and locked the door behind her. She tossed her clutch on the bed and paced the floor in tight, uneven lines. She'd never been corrected like that, not in public, not in private, not by anyone in the family, let alone Anthon. She picked up her phone again, opened her messages, typed out a text to a family friend on the board of one of Anthon's businesses. Anthon's out of line, you know that, right? She hovered her thumb over send, deleted it. Then another to her lawyer. Is there any clause in the estate agreement that gives him formal authority here? Deleted that too. She dropped the phone on the bed and sat, fingers steepled under her chin. All her usual tools, whispers, leverage, charm, felt dull tonight. Because none of them had worked on him. Anthon hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened, hadn't even explained himself. He had simply moved, and the entire room had followed. She leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling. The chandelier above was too bright, too exposed. She got up again and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back with a tight tug. Outside, the estate's staff courtyard was nearly empty, except for one figure, Anthon, walking alone along the back path, hands in his coat pockets, his steps slow and sure. He wasn't hiding. He didn't need to. She watched him turn the corner, disappearing from view like he'd never stopped walking forward. And that's when it landed. She had been raised with a name. He had become one without needing it. Matilda tried to stay composed. He walked back toward the lounge like it was a choice, not an exile. Her hands were clenched, tight around her phone, but her chin stayed high. Years of polished events and photo ops had taught her how to fake composure. Tonight, it felt heavier than ever. She entered the lounge without knocking. Empty. She dropped onto the armchair, coat still on, and stared at the black screen of the mounted TV. Her mind spun through names, board members, advisors, old friends who owed favors, people who might care enough to reel Anthon in. But she knew better. Anthon Carlo didn't respond to calls. He responded to conduct. She opened her messages again, this time tapping into her father's private assistant's contact. Get me everything Carlo's tied to. I want leverage. Any lawsuits, tax slips, vendor conflicts, dig. She hit send. Nothing bounced back. Not even a delivered. Another dead signal. She stood again, pacing in slow circles. She hated the quiet now. It mocked her. That babysitter, no, Tarian, had barely spoken a sentence. She didn't dress with flash, didn't command the room, and somehow Anthon had handed her the key to it. Matilda picked up the untouched plastic-wrapped dessert on the side table and stared at it. Sugared almonds, a pear glaze, melted now, like it no longer belonged to the menu it came from, the same way she no longer felt part of the house she grew up in. Then, her phone buzzed. It was a call. Blocked ID. She swiped to answer immediately. Do you know what you've done? She snapped. A pause. Then the voice, low, steady, unmistakably calm, answered, Yes, I answered you. Her spine straightened. You think this is finished? She hissed. No, Anthon said. I think this is where it starts. I'm still a Dorn, she bit out. That name used to mean something, he said. Until tonight, static lingered on the line. He didn't hang up first. He let the weight settle. Then, you gave me no choice. You insulted the one person in the room who never asked for a spotlight, and you did it because you thought no one would challenge you. Silence. Consider yourself corrected. Click. He was gone. Have you ever stood up without raising your voice? Share your story below. Matilda sat in the lounge for a long time after the call ended. No tears, no yelling, just stillness, like even her emotions didn't know where to land. The plastic around her dessert had fogged completely. Condensation pooled along the rim, blurring the colors beneath. It looked as out of place as she felt. She pulled her coat tighter, even though the room was warm. She picked up her phone again, scrolling through contacts she once used like cards in a deck. Names she used to drop at tables to quiet people. The people who used to call her first. No one felt useful now. No one would go against Anthon. Not after the way he'd handled her tonight, without raising his voice, without threatening her directly, without even saying her full name. She had made herself the lesson, and he had delivered it without breaking stride. Across the estate she could hear faint classical music playing again. The party had reset. Dessert had resumed. Life went on, without her. She stood and walked to the mirror in the corner, brushing a strand of hair back into place. Her reflection stared back like a mask she hadn't removed in years. She remembered how she'd once called Anthon forgettable. Too quiet. Now she couldn't forget him if she tried. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a single text from an unknown number. When silence speaks, listen. She stared at it. Then, slowly, she placed her phone face down on the table and picked up her clutch. She wasn't ready to leave. But she wasn't welcome to stay. And even if no one had said the words, she knew what had happened tonight. The Dorn name hadn't crumbled. It had been demoted. By someone who didn't need the spotlight, because he had built the room. Matilda opened the lounge door and stepped into the hallway. As she turned the corner, she stopped in her tracks. Down the corridor she saw Tyrion again, holding a folded blanket in her arms, walking calmly, head high, as if nothing in the world could touch her. No security, no escort, no announcement, but every staff member stepped aside for her. Matilda didn't say a word. She just stood there, unseen this time, because dignity had changed hands, and she wasn't holding it anymore. The morning air inside the estate was warm, quiet, and laced with the soft smell of cinnamon and pine. No footsteps rushed, no voices clashed. The storm of the night before had passed, and something softer had taken its place. Tyrion stepped into the kitchen wrapped in a pale blue cashmere sweater that wasn't hers. It had been folded neatly on the corner of her cot that morning. No note attached, just waiting. She'd hesitated before putting it on, but the moment it touched her skin, she understood. Someone had meant for her to feel seen. The fabric was soft, but not showy. Expensive, but not flashy. Like it was chosen with thought, not show. When she entered the staff kitchen, heads lifted. People didn't stare. They smiled. "Morning," said one of the servers, handing her a fresh mug. "Happy Christmas," added the pastry chef, placing a small plate with a croissant and a strip of crisp turkey bacon in front of her. She blinked. "I didn't ask for—" "You didn't have to." She sat down slowly, unsure how to respond. The chair didn't creak like usual. The space around her felt different. Quieter. Not because no one was speaking, because no one was pretending. She sipped the cocoa. It wasn't from a packet. It was real. Dark, rich, smooth. "You okay?" one of the assistants asked from across the counter. Tyrion nodded. "Yeah, just different kind of morning. Feels earned," he said, then turned back to his dishes. She glanced around the room. The looks weren't heavy or pitying. They were nods of acknowledgement, of quiet respect, of knowing what she had held last night without breaking. She didn't need anyone to clap. This was better. Then the door opened behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Anthon stepped into the kitchen like he belonged there, not as a guest, as someone who didn't care what room he had to walk through to speak directly. He wasn't in a suit anymore, just a dark sweater, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and tailored slacks that didn't draw attention. No entourage, no announcement, just him, and that silence that always made people straighten their spines. Tyrion turned slightly as he approached. She didn't stand. He didn't ask her to. He walked to the counter, reached for the kettle beside the stove, and poured a second cup of cocoa into a ceramic mug without a word. Then he turned and set it down across from her. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said. She looked at him, steady. "I said I'd finish the shift. That's not what I meant." Their eyes held. Around them, quiet movement resumed. The staff didn't eavesdrop, but no one left either. Anthon took a sip of his cocoa. Cashmere suits you, he said. I figured it wasn't a uniform issue. It's not, he replied. It's a message. She raised an eyebrow. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. I saw the email, she said after a moment. NYU, full tuition. My sister, she doesn't know yet. She will. Tarian leaned back slightly, fingers wrapped around the warm mug. I've had people offer help before, she said. Always strings attached. He didn't interrupt. But this doesn't feel like help. It's not. She looked at him, confused. It's recognition, he said simply. No one spoke for a few seconds. Finally, she asked, Why me? Anthon set his cup down gently, eyes not leaving hers. Because you didn't demand the room's respect, he said. You earned it. While everyone else wanted attention, you gave protection. Without asking for a receipt, Tarian's grip on the mug loosened. People like you, he continued, hold everything together and rarely get held. She looked away for the first time. He let her. Then, after a long moment, he added, That's the kind of strength I invest in. Tarian didn't know how to respond. The room hadn't fallen silent. Anthon hadn't said it loudly. But it was the kind of sentence that reached deeper than volume ever could. That's the kind of strength I invest in. Not praise, not flattery. A statement of fact. She lowered her eyes, not out of shame, but because holding that kind of weight felt unfamiliar. She didn't know what to do with it. Her hands tightened around the mug again, grounding herself. I wasn't trying to prove anything, she said after a beat. You didn't have to, he answered. That's what made it visible. She looked up slowly. Across from her, Anthon's expression remained unreadable. Not cold, just focused, like someone who didn't waste words when the truth had already been spoken. One of the kitchen staff slipped past them with a tray of warm rolls. Another passed with clean linens. No one interrupted. No one leaned in. But eyes flicked toward her again. Not with pity, with permission. Permission to stay. Anthon glanced toward the back window, where snow still drifted over the trees. I don't offer many things twice, he said. I'm not expecting you to. He nodded once, satisfied with the answer. Then, reaching into his coat pocket, he placed a small folded card on the table between them. Your official contract. If you're ready. Tarian didn't reach for it. She stared at it instead, her heartbeat steady but full. She thought about her mother in Newark, how she used to squeeze her hand before. Every job interview and whisper, go in like you already belong there. She thought about her sister, alone on a campus trying to blend into a world that rarely made room for them. And now, this table, this cocoa, this moment. Anthon stood up, slow and deliberate. You don't have to answer me now, he said. But you will. With actions. He turned to leave. Tarian looked at the folded contract again, still untouched. Then she looked at her sweater sleeve, brushing her thumb over the soft blue fabric. Someone had seen her, not saved her. Seen her. Tarian didn't move for several minutes. The folded contract stayed on the table, unopened, undisturbed, but not ignored. Outside, soft flurries continued falling. The trees were dusted in white, like someone had painted the edges by hand. The world looked quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something else, something unspoken. She stood slowly, carrying the empty mug to the sink. A staff member rushed over, but Tarian shook her head with a faint smile. I've got it. The woman nodded and stepped back, but there was something new in her gaze. Not politeness, not routine. Respect. Tarian wiped the counter beside the sink. Not out of obligation, but because it grounded her. She folded the dish towel once, then again, then turned around. The contract still sat on the table. She returned to it, picked it up, and held it in her hands like it might burn her or bless her. It did neither. It just waited. She unfolded it carefully. The details were precise. Anthon's signature already inked in sharp black pen at the bottom, her name typed, waiting for hers to meet it. Miss Sorrell? She looked up. It was Enzo, one of the older house staff. His voice was gentle, not rushed. Mr. Carlo said to tell you the black car is waiting, if you choose to go back to your place to get anything. Or Just to think. Tarian nodded. Thank you. She slipped the contract into the side pocket of her coat. As she walked through the front hall, the staff stood aside. They didn't speak, but one of them, Marta, touched Tarian's arm softly and placed a small velvet box in her palm. What's this? Christmas, Marta said. Tarian opened it once she was seated in the car. Inside was a pin, small, silver, shaped like a flame. On the underside was a single engraved word. Proof. The driver closed the door gently behind her. The engine hummed. The mansion grew smaller behind them as they drove out through the gates. But in her coat pocket and on her lap, and in the quiet thud of her heart, something had already opened. She touched the pin once more, then whispered to herself, I'm not afraid to say yes. Then her phone lit up. Unknown number. She stared at it. It rang once more. The car ride back to her apartment felt like it belonged to someone else. Tarian sat still in the back seat, fingers curled loosely around the folded contract inside her coat pocket. The silver flame pin lay on her lap, catching the morning light that streamed through the tinted windows. She hadn't spoken since the gates of Via Cerise faded behind her. The warmth of cocoa still lingered in her chest, but something bigger now pressed beneath her ribs. The driver didn't ask her anything, just drove with the quiet focus of someone used to transporting people who held secrets. When they pulled up to her street, she blinked. Same cracked pavement, same rusting mailbox, same building with the loose step she'd meant to tell the landlord about last spring. But it looked different now. She thanked the driver, climbed out, and walked upstairs. Inside her apartment, the air felt thin. Not cold, not warm. Just the kind of space you lived in when you didn't have the luxury to ask for more. She set the pin down on the kitchen counter. By Guy 5, her phone buzzed as she hung up her coat. An email notification. She picked up the phone slowly, more habit than urgency. Then froze. Subject line, payment confirmation, St. Vincent's Medical. She opened it with shaking fingers. Balance, $0 date of payment, 1/12/25, paid in full by Carlo Family Foundation. Her knees almost gave. She sank into the chair by the window and gripped the phone like it might vanish. Another email arrived. Subject, NYU tuition confirmation, spring term student. Layla Sorrell tuition status, paid, full coverage authorized. Tarian covered her mouth with her hand. She wasn't dreaming. She wasn't imagining this. This was real. A third email buzzed in. This one different. Subject, housing assignment, East Harlem private residence. She opened it slowly. Unit, top floor, 2BR, fully furnished. Private elevator. Discreet entry. Security detail assigned, non-invasive. She stood up too quickly, the chair sliding back. All 3 messages came from one sender. She looked at the email signature, trying to process it all. Then her eyes settled on the final line. Sent by, Office of Anton Carlo Tarian. Couldn't stop reading it. The name stared back at her from the screen. Anton Carlo. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago did. In whispers, in headlines, in warnings. A man tied to empire, power, and fear, but also quiet discipline. Ruthless when crossed. Silent when he struck. Why her? Why? Now? She scrolled again. The attachments loaded slowly. PDF confirmations, encrypted access links, service receipts for private security. One even included a photo of her new apartment building. Sleek, glass, surveillance discreetly positioned. He had set her up in a world she didn't ask for. No contact, no conditions. Her breath caught. Not a single demand. Not one word asking her to do anything. But that only made it more unnerving. Was this protection? Payment? Pity? She tapped into another tab and opened her medical portal. Her mother's file had an alert, discharged. Care transitioned to in-home nursing. Cost covered by third-party benefactor. Tarian's hands trembled. The Carlo Family Foundation was supposed to fund hospitals, art galleries, and church restorations. It didn't pay off personal debts for unknown waitresses. Her email pinged again. This one was personal. From CEO at carlogroups.company. Subject, for your consideration. Tarion, I ask nothing. You observed. You acted. That alone shifted an outcome. People in my world don't notice details. You did. If you choose to ignore this, I'll never contact you again. But if you're willing to step into something larger than a life of surviving, there's a seat waiting. In New York. No titles. No promises. Just a place where your instincts belong. CN. She read it. Twice. 3 times. It didn't feel like an offer. It felt like a door creaked open, and the rest of her life sat just beyond the threshold. The old radiator hissed beside her. She looked around her 1-bedroom apartment, the frayed curtains, the third-hand furniture, the sticky cabinet handle. She turned her gaze back to the screen. Anthony Carlo. The name no longer echoed fear. It echoed something else, something her old life had never given her. Possibility. She clicked. Reply. Paused, then heard a noise. Her phone buzzed. Unknown. Number. And a single text lit up the screen. We sent one more thing. The text chilled her more than it should have. She opened it. Downstairs. Signed delivery. Tarion pulled on her oversized coat and ran down the narrow stairwell. Her mind spun the entire way. No one should know her building that well. No one should have access to her number, her home, her timing. But when she opened the lobby door, the courier stood there, shivering in a charcoal coat with a thick envelope in hand. He didn't ask for ID. He simply said, "This is for you, Ms. Ellis." She took it. Who? But he was already walking away. Tarion looked down at the envelope. Heavy, lined, no logo. She opened it slowly with shaking fingers. Inside was a handwritten letter. You've seen what people with power do to those without it. Some humiliate, some destroy, some look away. I was raised among all 3. But someone once told me, real power should restore. This isn't charity, it's alignment. You saw what others ignored. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't grandstand. That's the kind of vision I need near me. You've already changed one life. Ready to change. More? Anthony Carlo. Behind the letter was a simple black card. A key card. To the penthouse of Carlo Group in Manhattan. She blinked. Hard. She didn't dream of New York. She never once searched for some grand ladder to climb. She only ever wanted survival with dignity. But here was a man who watched her face humiliation. And instead of stepping in with noise or ego, he used silence to change the outcome. Not for applause, not for show, for balance. Her balance. Tarion folded the letter. This wasn't a job offer. It was a test of who she believed she was. Someone from South Chicago who would always keep her head down? Or someone who had watched the elite play their games and now had a seat waiting to shift the rules? She walked back upstairs in silence, and as she locked her door, her phone buzzed again. A single line. Your flight leaves Friday. If you board, I'll know your answer. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. Her fingers gripped the card tighter. Quiet justice had its own gravity, and now it was pulling her toward a skyline she never imagined standing beneath. Tarion didn't sleep that night. She packed slowly, her hands steady even while her mind raced. One bag. Just one. She didn't tell anyone. Not her landlord, not her old boss at the pharmacy, not even her cousin who usually knew everything before it happened. This move wasn't something to be debated. It was a response. Friday came. She took the train to Midway. No upgrades, no escort, no camera flash grand farewell. Just a girl with a name no one remembered stepping onto a flight that was clearly reserved under someone else's power. When she landed at JFK, a black sedan was waiting with no name card. Only a silent driver and a chilled bottle of water in the back seat. No words were exchanged, not until the elevator opened at the Carlo Tower. The top floor was all glass, steel, and views she had never even imagined. The city stretched beyond her comprehension. Snow flurries painted the sky in soft motion. Anthony Carlo stood by the window with his back to her. No suit jacket. Sleeves rolled. Silence again. He didn't turn right away. He spoke first. You didn't ask for this, he said quietly. But you earned it. Tarion walked in slowly. What is this? He turned. His eyes, the same ones that had silently judged that night at Bella Vita, now held something she hadn't expected. Respect. Redirection, he said. Not a job, not a rescue. A choice. She stared at him. And if I say no? He smiled faintly. Then I'll thank you for your silence, and wish you a life far away from people like me. She stepped closer. And if I say yes? His voice dropped. Then you'll help recalibrate a world that favors the loud and forgets the observant. She let the words sit. He offered no pitch, no pressure, only a path, one that didn't promise ease, but offered purpose. She nodded once. I don't want credit, she said. You won't get it, he replied. She looked out the window, then back at him. Good. That night, she slept in a city she had only seen in dreams, but this time not as a visitor, not as a victim, as a force, quiet, steady, ready. Christmas Eve. The city glittered beneath a soft snowfall. Lights blinked across the skyline, and the streets below buzzed with last-minute shoppers and bundled couples. But above it all, at the very top of Carlo Tower, it was silent. Tarion stood barefoot in the penthouse kitchen, her palm flat on the marble counter, waiting. She hadn't expected to spend Christmas in New York, not in this penthouse, not under these circumstances, but she didn't flinch. She belonged here. The door opened behind her. Anthony walked in, sleeves rolled, dark eyes fixed on her. He didn't speak at first. He poured 2 glasses of water. No wine, no gifts, no decorations, only stillness. He handed her a glass. You could have taken the money and disappeared. I'm not interested in hush money. I know. He leaned against the counter beside her. Tarion didn't look at him. She stared ahead. Declan Rothschild's family wants a public apology from you, he said. She didn't blink. He should apologize to every woman he's ever touched without permission. Anthony studied her. They'll offer a payout. I won't take it. I didn't say you should. I said they'll offer. She turned to him now, her expression unreadable. What happens if I don't bend? His voice didn't waver. Then I'll break their narrative. You? He nodded. Not for you. For what's right. She didn't thank him. That wasn't their language. Instead, she asked, why did you whisper warning that night? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said to him, and to me. He looked at her. It was a beginning. Tarion set her glass down. This isn't a fairy tale, Anthony. I don't believe in fairy tales. I believe in balance. Balance? She scoffed. Between fear and respect. Between silence and justice. They stood close now, but not intimate. Just aligned. He said, you still want to go back to Chicago? No. Not yet. Then stay. Quietly. No press. No title. I don't want one. He gave the smallest nod. Good. She turned back toward the window. I just want him to know, she said, that someone saw it, that he didn't win. Anthony didn't move. He didn't, he said. You're still standing. As the snow drifted past the glass, Tarion realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the start of her second life. Silent, sharper, and this time she'd write the rules. The snow didn't fall loudly that morning. It didn't come down in a storm. It whispered, slow and gentle, flurries tapping the tall windows of the staff quarters. Tarion sat at the edge of her bed, wrapped in the only coat she owned that didn't have a tear. Her fingertips were pressed together, her elbows on her knees, eyes locked on the laptop screen. The email was still open. The subject line was clear. Carlo Holdings, full transfer package. Below it, line after line spelled out a future she didn't know how to hold in her hands. Full relocation to New York City. Luxury apartment under Carlo Trust. Security detail assigned discreetly. Medical bills covered for her mother, cleared to 0. Tuition paid for her sister. 4 years, any school. Sign-on bonus, no conditions, no clawback. Role, cultural advisor to Carlo family board. She read it again, then again, as if the words might vanish if she blinked too hard. It didn't feel like a job offer. It felt like an open door, but one she wasn't sure she was allowed to walk through. Her chest ached with the weight of it. Was this real? Could someone like her carry that name? Downstairs, the estate hummed quietly. The staff moved with calm precision, holiday jazz playing under low voices. The guests had all left. Matilda's name was no longer mentioned, and no one asked Tarion to refill water or wipe a floor. Instead, they greeted her with light nods, respectful, changed. That morning, she hadn't put on her apron. She hadn't needed to. Anthony Carlo stood in the conservatory, gloved hands tucked behind his back, gaze fixed on the gray horizon outside. His brother came in, a glass of hot cider in one hand. "You sure about all this?" Anthony didn't turn. "She carries the same thing Yvonne did, only quieter." His brother shifted. "But this girl, she's not from any of the usual places. She's better. A beat." "Did you tell her that?" Anthony finally turned. "No." "Why?" "Because it matters more if she decides it on her own." Tarion stepped outside for air. The garden wall was dusted white. She walked past the stone path, past the greenhouse, and stopped at the sculpture of the rose, cast in bronze, one she used to scrub in the summers without ever asking who placed it there. Now she knew. She wasn't afraid of scrubbing anymore. She just wasn't going to do it for free. The envelope sat in her coat pocket again, its edges worn now from being opened and shut all night. The card inside held no logo, no dramatic font, just 3 lines handwritten in black ink. "My sister had no one. You have me, if you choose." She stood under the arch of the old guest house, breath curling in front of her lips as she looked out toward the trees. In the distance, a black SUV pulled up slowly, not rushed, not blaring. Anthony Carlo stepped out alone, wearing a wool coat, leather gloves, and a calm expression that had once intimidated her. Now she understood it. He didn't speak. He walked the path toward her, stopping 2 feet away. She didn't bow. She didn't speak. She simply opened her hand. Inside was the envelope, creased, held flat. He didn't take it. Instead, he spoke one sentence. "You don't work for me. You choose beside me." Her eyes flickered. He said nothing else, then turned and walked back to the SUV. She stood in the snow until his car was gone. Later that evening, back inside her room, she opened her window. Snowflakes drifted in. Cold air swept across her cheeks as she sat back down and placed her fingers on the keyboard. The cursor blinked inside the reply box. Empty. Waiting. No grand speech. No poetic thank you. She typed 3 words. "I accept." Quietly. She clicked send and closed the laptop with steady hands.